From the NHL Central Scouting Combine in Buffalo, New York, I'm Jack Michaels with Bob Stauffer and Sam Cosentino. We are in Buffalo, and our coverage, of course, all weekend provided by Sport Check. Sam, it's been an interesting week in terms of getting to know these prospects and getting to get a beat on what's going to happen in 3 weeks, the real important stuff going on in Dallas. For you, outside of the big names, who are a couple of people that Edmontonians and others around the league should be aware of?
Two guys in particular, and I'll start with Sarah Noel, plays for the Oshawa Generals. His father played in the CFL, and a guy who's got a big body, good frame, real athletic, but relatively new to the game in terms of making it an all-year-round commitment. Our colleague at Sportsnet, Jason York, has been helping mentoring him since he was a young age and getting into his teens. But here's a guy who's a really good goal scorer, an excellent skater, moves well, and I think the thing that intrigues me most about him is he's got a really high ceiling. So that would be one guy. Another guy that I'd love to talk about, who I identified at the start of the year, actually just across the street here in Buffalo at the Prospects game, is Keandre Miller. Plays for the U.S. Under-18 program. Big, tall kid playing second year. Converted from forward to defense, and a guy who, again, just has this massive ceiling. Really good skaters, got some bite to his game. Not the best stick skills, but shoots the puck well, and is a guy who's really improved over the course of the year. So there'd be two guys that I think you're going to see in the first round. Sarah Noel maybe identified as being that guy earlier, but Keandre Miller is still a guy that I think ends up there in the first.
Sam, it's interesting because, the consensus, obviously, Dalling's going number one, and then we have the three forwards that go top five. Then there's going to be a run of D. Three of the defensemen are smaller guys, right? And I think you know that. So maybe just a thought on Quinn Hughes along with Ty Smith and perhaps the biggest wild card, Adam Boqvist.
Yeah, pretty unbelievable group, and a lot of similarities between at least two of them when it comes to Boqvist and Hughes. There's a couple of guys that have pretty much the same parts of their game that are really good, and the same criticisms in terms of both maybe with some deficiencies in the defensive zone. But when they have the puck, they're unbelievable. I'd say Boqvist is a little bit better shooter than where Hughes is. I think Hughes thinks the game a little bit better, and that largely due to his family connections. His dad, Jim, has been around for 100 years. His mother played in world championships representing the U.S. And, of course, brother Jack, the younger one, who we'll be talking about next year here as being the first overall pick. So those two guys. Now I'm going to separate a little bit and talk a little bit about Ty Smith. I just love this guy. There's some family adversity in his background. He was the first overall selection in the WHL draft. Dan Lambert, being a first-year head coach in Spokane, has been a perfect marriage for him, because you go back, Bob, right, you remember sure. Dan when he played. I think Ty isn't quite as high-end offensive, but in terms of their skating ability and moving pucks, there are some similarities there, and I think Dan would have been able to impart a lot of knowledge on Ty Smith with a good base that was instilled from when Don Nockbar was the coach there. But Ty Smith is a really good skater. He's a cerebral player. He's a puck mover. To be honest with you, I didn't really like his game at the under-18s, right, but I think there's too good a book already on him to have that under-18 performance push him more to the back of the bus. So he's probably, all three of those guys are going to go inside 15. Probably two of them end up inside the top 10. In what order? I'd have to say probably Boqvist, Hughes, and Ty Smith would be the third of the three.
Sam, as you know, there's inevitably going to be a riser and a faller, even between perhaps now and Dallas. This is an Oilers show, so I'd ask you, picking at 10 and again around 40 in the early second round, who are guys that might be in play for the Edmonton Oilers?
Well, I think Boqvist is probably one of those guys that you look at many of the prognostications earlier in the year, and some of the ones that have come out recently probably would have had him inside the top 7. I think now that changes a little bit. I think about Noah Dobson, and I think about Evan Bouchard as two guys that have probably vaulted themselves over Boqvist, which pushes him back a little bit because of that run of forwards and wingers that you talked about. And then you have the emergence of Jesperi Kotkaniemi, who I now think finds himself inside the top 10 when maybe before he was sitting in about that 15 spot. So that's going to try to change the complexion of that first group of 10. So I think Boqvist is probably going to be a guy who's going to be there for Edmonton. Now we look at the pick at 40, and I still think about a couple of defensemen. It's not likely that they're going to use a defenseman at 10 and then again at 40, but let's say the landscape does change. They get a forward at 10. Now we're talking about 40. Two guys in particular that I would think would be in that range. Kalen Addison, defenseman with the Lethbridge Hurricanes. Really good offensive defenseman, puck-moving guy, a little bit on the smallish side. but a guy who's had that want and desire for a long time, and I think a guy down the road who can run a power play unit for you. Maybe not necessarily a first power play, but a second. And the other guy who I found really intriguing, we had him in our interviews yesterday, Johnny Tyconic, who plays with the Penticton Vs. We're seeing a run here. When you think about Dante Fabro, awesome. And that was the thing that really struck me about him, because he told us about his 16-year-old year and how he had some struggles personally, and his game reflected that. He was an introverted guy who didn't play the style of game that he's best accustomed to. Well, he seeks the help of Lyle Masters, a family friend, a sports psychologist. He gets things turned around and becomes a more gregarious, outgoing guy. And when I watched him back in January, his game showed that. Get up and go, get into the play, high energy, that type of guy. So I think he's a guy who's going to be in that 40 range, who'd be a very interesting pick.
Sam, you've just validated Bob and I's decision to draft you. That's why you get the lead analyst for CHL coverage on Sportsnet. That kind of insight. Bob and I have learned something after coming to these years, all these years at the NHL Combine. We're in Buffalo. We'll be in Dallas in about 3 weeks' time. So for the next 2.5 weeks, keep it locked. We'll have our mock draft as per usual right here on Oilers TV. Signing off from Buffalo.